Hello and welcome to Psychology 301 Learning. This is Dr. Williams, and this is the beginning of Unit 3, where we're going to talk about building a better critter and specifically about instrumental learning. Sorry about that. Here we go. So let's start off going back and revisiting where we've been in terms of this little critter that we're trying to bring into the 21st century in terms of its sophistication and its ability to adapt to the environment. So we started with genetically determined behaviors, so things like fixed reflexes and action patterns and taxis and kinesis. And in Unit 1, we added non-associative learning mechanisms. So the ability to modify these reflexive-like behaviors through the processes of habituation and sensitization. In Unit 2, we added classical conditioning. Classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian conditioning, and we talk specifically about excitatory conditioning and the parasitic opposite, referred to as inhibitory conditioning. So now we can learn about associations between events in the world, one event that predicts another, and we can cancel that excitatory conditioning through inhibitory conditioning when we have cues that tell us that the unconditioned stimulus will not be delivered. So our little critter's getting a lot more sophisticated, which is great. But even classical conditioning, we're still talking about reflexive-like behavior. And many organisms have behaviors that are that go beyond the simple stimulus response reflex-like pattern. And so Unit 3, we're going to talk about a new kind of behavior. We're going to talk about operants or operant behaviors, also known as instrumental behaviors. And these are voluntary behaviors, and we're going to form associations between our voluntary behavior and the consequences of that voluntary behavior. We're going to let our little critter learn about the association between behavior and its consequences so that it can learn whether or not to repeat a behavior in the future in terms of the consequences that it brings to the organism. So this unit is all about learning about consequences, and the behavior is referred to as instrumental or operant behavior, and the process is called operant conditioning or instrumental learning. And now we're talking about the kinds of behaviors, sophisticated behaviors, that have to do with what we often think of as behaviors that we choose to engage in, no longer reflexive. These are behaviors that are controlled by skeletal muscles and are not elicited by a stimulus, but rather emitted by the organism. So let's talk a little bit about instrumental learning. Behavior that's instrumental in bringing about consequences is referred to as instrumental behavior or operant behavior. And these behaviors that occur are in turn affected by the consequences. In other words, if you engage in a behavior and it has a positive or a positive consequence or a consequence that's advantageous, then when you're in a similar circumstance, you'll probably repeat that behavior. And the same behavior emitted in a different environment might not confer advantage. It might actually create a negative consequence, a negative outcome. It might actually be more harmful than beneficial. And in those circumstances, with instrumental learning, we learn to withhold those behaviors and only use them in environments where we've learned that they're beneficial. And so we don't repeat them in places where it doesn't help. Okay, hang on here. I'm trying to change slides, and there we go. All right, so instrumental learning is also known as operant learning. Skinner defined these behaviors as operants because they operate on the environment. These are non-reflexive behaviors that produce change in the immediate environment. What you do has an impact on the environment, and that change, in turn, determines whether or not you should repeat that behavior in the future under similar circumstances. So let me give you a couple of examples. The first one is being in a room with, and then deciding that you would like to leave the room. And so the operant response is going to the door, turning the knob, and pushing on the door. And the consequence is that the door swings open and you can go outside. And so the behavior of turning the knob and pushing is maintained by the consequence of being able to get on the other side of the door. If you've ever owned dogs or cats who wish that they had opposable thumbs so that they could turn the knob themselves, getting on the other side of the door is a valuable, it's a valuable behavior for lots of critters. And your dogs or your cats have to rely on a different set of behaviors. So they don't turn the knob, they have to ask you, they have to engage in behaviors that let you know that you need to open the door so that they can get out. All right. Example number 2, asking for an advance from your parents. So you run a little, this is back when you were a freshman, you run a little low on your, on funds by the end of the month. So the operant behavior is that you make a phone call and you ask your mom or your dad if you can have a little extra money to get you through till the end of the month. And the consequence is that you either find a deposit's been made to your account or a check arrives in the mail. And so the behavior of asking for money from your parents is maintained by the consequence of getting that check in the mail. So what happens when you don't get the money? I mean, we all reach the point where our parents no longer send us money when we ask. There's this extra space here. I don't like that. It's making me crazy. Oh, no, I guess not. All right. So what happens when you don't get the money? Well, the first time you have a long history of asking for money and maybe getting it, and so it tends to persist. One negative experience isn't enough to rule out all of your history, but over time, repeated attempts to get them to send you money continue to fail and continue to fail until you finally give up. In fact, you'll delay, you will wait to make the phone call, and so we'll start to see the behavior diminish in intensity and frequency when you don't get what it is that maintains the behavior. So these are just a couple of examples. Let's talk about these outcomes, because outcomes can vary along 2 main dimensions. One of them is the type of stimulus. You can either get an appetitive stimulus, which is good stuff, or you can get aversive stimuli, which are bad things. And how those outcomes present themselves is also a dimension. So we talk about the type of contingency. A positive contingency is like a positive correlation. You get the stimulus, good or bad. You could get a good stimulus or you could get a bad stimulus. The stimulus is presented, or you could have a negative contingency where the stimulus is removed. So we could take away something good or take away something bad. And the result is that we produce several different kinds of consequences, if you will, or outcomes. Let's talk a little bit about the stimuli. Appetitive stimuli, I love the word appetitive stimulus because it looks like the word appetite, which means it's something that you want. There's something that you want. An appetitive stimulus is a pleasant or a desired stimulus that your little critter, whether it's you or your roommate or your spouse or your child or your pet, whoever it is, they would work to earn that stimulus. So for some people that might be money or praise or affection. For my dog, it's snacks and treats. I like chocolate chip cookies. So lots of different things could be appetitive stimuli. But notice this little asterisk. I'm going to use there's a little asterisk right here. And that asterisk means that a stimulus is deemed appetitive by the individual receiving it. So you might look at a chocolate chip cookie and go, ooh, that's great. But if your roommate is, say, allergic to chocolate, then maybe she's not going to see those chocolate chip cookies the same way that you do. Aversive stimuli are also defined with respect to your subject. These are unpleasant stimuli that the subject, your little critter, whoever it is, will work to avoid. So these could be things like being shocked or being pinched or being hit. Well, I guess I don't know, being pinched. I guess it depends on where you're from. If you're from France, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Being reprimanded, getting a bad grade, moldy cookies. Please, no moldy cookies. So things that we would rather avoid. So the stimuli that could either be presented or taken away could be either appetitive or they could be aversive. Now, let me give you some examples here. This is a great study by Charlotte, Kurtz, and Casey from 1990. They worked with 2 children with autism who engaged in, each one of them engaged in inappropriate behavior or perseverative behavior. One of the children, they're called stereotypies, and one of the children engaged in echolalia, which is repeating back whatever you say. So if I asked you, what's your name, instead of answering with the answer, my name is Wendy, they would simply repeat the question back to you. What's your name? Who are you? Who are you? They would just repeat it back. Very, it is a characteristic of some individuals with autism engage in echolalia. Perseverative behavior is behavior where they continue engaging in the same behavior over and over, repetitive behaviors. And these are considered to be aberrant behaviors and typically in public settings, inappropriate behaviors. So each child had their own inappropriate behavior, and the activity here was to engage in an educational intervention. So they were to engage in certain academic tasks like naming body parts or using prepositions or using pronouns. And they received one of 2 reinforcers. They would either receive a bit of food, a treat, or they were allowed to engage in 5 seconds of this aberrant behavior. One child got to be echolalic, the other child got to engage in perseverative behaviors like hand flapping or body rocking. And the question was, which of the 2 reinforcers, so here we have 2 reinforcers, which of the 2, the food or the freedom to engage in aberrant behavior, was a more effective reinforcer for getting the children to engage in these educational activities. And here are the data. So we have one child on the left and another child on the right. Child on the left is a child that engages in echolalia, and correct performance is here on the ordinate. Percent of correct performance, so of the opportunities to engage in behavior, how many of them were correct, and across the bottom are sessions. On the right, we have the child that engages in perseverative behaviors, perseverative stereotypies, and again, we have the percent of opportunities and the percent correct engaging in the behavior requested, so naming body parts, whatever, and sessions across the bottom. And the first thing that you'll notice is that the open circles for both children are the reinforcers that involve these stereotypic behaviors. The closed circles are the use of food, and what we see are the average performances. So, and we have baseline as the dotted line. So here we have right below 60%, we have our baseline, and for the other child around 55 for 56%. And what you'll notice right away for both children is that they actually acquire these educational activities faster and with greater percentages using these stereotypic behaviors as reinforcers rather than food as a reinforcer. So, and what we see is that the behavior increases above 70%. It goes up about 12% for the first child and goes all the way up to nearly 90% here for the child that engages in hand flapping and rocking. So this is a really good example of this idea that reinforcers have to be defined by the person receiving them and not by the person providing the reinforcement. If I say I like peanut butter chocolate chip cookies and I'm going to use peanut butter chocolate chip cookies to reinforce your behavior, that'll be great if you like peanut butter chocolate chip cookies. But if you don't like peanut butter chocolate chip, or if you're allergic to peanuts or you're allergic to chocolate, it's not going to be a reinforcer no matter how much I like it. All right, so it has to be defined with respect to the individual receiving the reinforcer. All right, Now, the other dimension that we're talking about is the type of contingency used. In a positive contingency, the operant behavior, whatever it is, the response results or produces the presentation of that stimulus or that outcome. So you would be given something. So you can give treats, you can give praise, but you can also give spankings and reprimands. So, but the important thing is that and I'm going to move my cursor here. The important point is that the stimulus is presented. And it's called a positive contingency. You can think of it kind of like a positive correlation. So you do the behavior, you're presented with the outcome. A negative contingency, on the other hand, the operant behavior, the behavior that changes the environment, results in the termination or the removal of a stimulus or an outcome. So now your behavior is going to take away something, like your privileges. Being grounded is having your privileges revoked. Timeout is having the freedom to earn reinforcers or be in the room taken away. But it can also be positive. We brush our teeth because it prevents cavities. We put medication on a wound because it helps the wound to go away. So neither a positive contingency nor a negative contingency can really be viewed as a good thing or a bad thing. Positive does not mean good and negative does not mean bad. It simply means positive contingency means we're adding, negative contingency just means that we're taking it away. So when we put these two dimensions together, we can create sort of this Latin square. So I'll use my cursor here. We have the type of contingency across the top. We can have positive contingencies and negative contingencies where we're adding a stimulus or taking a stimulus away. And we have the type of stimulus over here as either being appetitive or aversive. So if we look at the first box, we have a positive contingency with an appetitive stimulus. So we're presenting something that we want or that we like, and we call that positive reinforcement. And the behavior is actually strengthened for the future. So we engage in a behavior, we get something that we desire, that we would work to earn, and that behavior is strengthened under those circumstances. But we can use that same appetitive stimulus with a negative contingency, and what we end up with is negative punishment, because now we're taking away, here's that minus, we're taking away something that we like, so you end up with the removal of a preferred or desired stimulus, and that would be a form of punishment. But the type of punishment is because we're taking something away, so we call it negative punishment, and that behavior will be weakened in the future. Using a positive contingency with an aversive stimulus produces positive punishment. If you do something and I present an aversive stimulus, that's going to weaken that behavior. You're not going to want to repeat it. And if I remove an aversive stimulus, so we're the same aversive stimulus, but we remove it, we end up with negative reinforcement. This would be doing something to turn off something or make something aversive go away. And these four different procedures, or these four different types of associations or consequences, can be reviewed individually. So let's look at the reinforcement procedures. So any behavior, any instrumental behavior, can be strengthened by following it immediately with some kind of reinforcement. And so we use a reinforcement procedure to strengthen those behaviors for the future. Positive reinforcement presents that appetitive stimulus after the target response occurs. So you do the behavior and you get something back. You study hard and you get a good grade. So now we would call that positive reinforcement for your study behavior. And on the next test, you're probably going to study the same way. So this would be, we would qualify positive reinforcement as getting a treat, getting praise, getting approval. Here's an example, getting an award. So here is an award for our graduate TA, Romario, and he had a great day today. That's wonderful. And I'm going to assign that Dr. Wendy, and I'm going to tell him he's done a really good job as a TA. He did good TA behavior today. And that way he'll probably engage in good TA behavior in the future. Now, there's another type of reinforcement, negative reinforcement. So again, any operant or instrumental behavior can be strengthened by following it with some form of reinforcement, and we can use negative reinforcement. So we remove an aversive stimulus after the target behavior occurs. So for example, if you wear your seatbelt, many car manufacturers today have a buzzer that rings or buzzes until you put your seatbelt on. Sunglasses. Are you a person that puts your sunglasses on when it's, in the spring or the summer, it's starting to get bright out? So do you put your sunglasses on when you go outside? Well, when you put your sunglasses on, you're removing glare, and so you're more likely to engage in sunglass wearing if you can remove that aversive glare. The jabber face, this is one of my examples, are those people that are really nosy when you return papers or return exams in a class, and they lean over and they go, "How'd you do? Oh man, I did better than you. You're not very smart. You should study with me." And you're like, "Oh my gosh, make that person go away." And so the next time a test is going to be, or a paper is going to be returned to you, you might sit in a different place in the classroom, or you might peek around the corner and look at the teacher's office to see if the tests are outside and wait until that person leaves. So we're going to strengthen avoidance behaviors. So you're going to avoid that individual in the future because it's something you don't like. So here's an example. We brush our teeth. Why do we brush our teeth? Usually it's not because we have any direct consequences with the benefits of toothbrushing. What we do have is we remove things we don't like. So we get rid of our bad breath, we get the spinach out of our teeth, or we go to the dentist and we don't get in trouble, right? So we don't have cavities. So these are all removing aversive things in order to strengthen toothbrushing. Punishment procedures, on the other hand, weaken behavior. Any instrumental behavior can be weakened by following it immediately with some kind of punishment. And positive punishment, or true punishment, is where we literally present an aversive stimulus immediately after the unwanted target behavior occurs. So you do something and it's followed immediately by something awful. So this is like stick your fork in the outlet, you get shocked. Boom, not doing it again. So being yelled at for being late to class. I actually, when I was taking my learning class as an undergraduate, the professor, the first day of class said, "Don't ever come late to class. If you're late, don't come in. It's disruptive and it makes me forget. I don't use lecture notes. I just talk off the top of my head. And so you interrupt me and it's hard to get back on track and it disrupts the whole class. So don't come in. Wait till the break and then come in." Well, about 3 weeks into class, we're like 10 minutes into a lecture and one of the students shows up late and he comes through the door. And this was a class with maybe 400 people in it. It was a big lecture hall. And so he walks through the door and he starts up the stairs and the professor stops lecturing. And he climbs all the way up and then he gets to an aisle where there's a seat in the middle that's open. And so then he kind of pushes his way through. He's like, "Excuse me, pardon me, excuse me," until he gets to the seat. He turns around and sits down and immediately goes down to his backpack and starts rummaging in his backpack. By now, everyone is staring at him and the room is dead silent. And so he finally gets his notebook and his pencil and he sits up and he looks up and he realizes everybody's staring at him. And so he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt." And the professor responds by saying, "You need to leave." And the guy's like, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I really didn't mean." He's kind of jovial and smiling and apologetic. And the professor says, "No, I need you to leave. You need to get up and leave my classroom. I don't want people coming in late. You need to leave." And this kept going until the student literally realized he was serious, packs up his backpack, and leaves the room. Shocking. I mean, it was really, really disruptive and very uncomfortable. So about 2 weeks later, I have trouble finding a parking place and I show up late to class. Do I go in? Heck no! I don't go in. Heck no, I sit down on the floor next to the door and listen to the lecture and take notes. And it isn't until the break that I come in because I learn pretty good from other people's behavior. That his punishment was so powerful that it didn't just suppress his behavior, it even suppressed my behavior from ever happening again. So if you I remember also stealing a parking place from someone who had been waiting a long time, and the guy came through my window swinging. So I never did that again either. So true punishment is where your behavior produces a really bad outcome and you don't ever want to do that again. But in all of these cases, remember that the aversive stimulus is presented immediately after the behavior. So here's a good picture. We don't do that anymore. At least I don't think we do. Now you can also weaken behavior by using negative punishment, sometimes called response cost, where we remove an appetitive stimulus after the target response occurs. So this is, and I like, some people call it negative punishment. I like the word response cost because it tells you that you can do the behavior, but it's going to cost you. So response cost or negative punishment means I'm going to take something that you value away as a result of your behavior. So in this case, being placed on restriction. So you come in late, when you were in high school, you come in after curfew and your parents put you on restriction. If you get bad, I remember in my senior year of high school, if I got bad grades, they would take my car keys away. Getting fines for speeding, where you get caught speeding and they take your money away. Being placed in timeout. All of those are forms of negative punishment because we're not actually presenting anything aversive. What we're really doing is taking something we value, something appetitive, away. I love this little guy's face. He's not happy being put into timeout. All right. Now, I just want to remind you that a lot of people get reinforcement and punishment confused. So whenever you use the word reinforcement, whether you're talking about positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, you're referring to procedures that will strengthen the behavior or the response. It will strengthen the frequency of the response or the magnitude of the response or the probability of that response occurring again in the future. Any kind of reinforcement will strengthen behavior. Negative reinforcement is not a punishment procedure. It's a strengthening procedure that involves removing icky things from your presence. So you will find people who will say negative reinforcement is a type of punishment, and they're wrong, because reinforcement strengthens behavior. Think about it. If you are an engineer and you're asked to come in and reinforce a bridge, they want you to make it stronger. And you can do that either by adding supports or maybe by taking away certain problems that are affiliated with the bridge. Think about an army. If you are a battalion or in a bad situation and you call for reinforcements and they come, it makes your army stronger. So remember that reinforcement under any circumstances means to strengthen behavior, either by adding something appetitive or by removing something aversive. So why are these operant or instrumental procedures really advantageous? Why do we need to add these to our little critter? Well, any organism that can learn the association between their behavior and the consequences of their behavior are going to be able to do certain things. They're going to be able to repeat and strengthen behaviors that bring about positive or advantageous changes in the environment. So they'll be able to have an effect on the environment that's advantageous for them. They can also reduce or eliminate ineffective behaviors or possibly dangerous behaviors, bad behaviors. So you can repeat the ones that are advantageous to you and not repeat the ones that are dangerous or not just not beneficial, but possibly even problematic. And so with these abilities, you can adapt your environment so much better than other organisms that don't have these abilities. Now, I'm going to put this slide up here, but I'm not going to run them. But I want to just mention them to you so you can go into Pages and find these videos that I'd like you to see. Actually, I'm going to give you these links and you'll be able to go in and click. And these are YouTube videos. So there's one that deals with training of monkeys to help the disabled. There's another one that deals with recovery teams where they train marine mammals to recover equipment and sometimes to identify dangerous equipment like underwater bombs. There's a video about the Gambian landmine rats that are used to go out and search for landmines. It's an agency called APOPO. And finally, there's some work at the University of Pennsylvania working with dogs to have them sniff tissue samples and detect cancer. So I want you to leave here and go to the links in Canvas that will get you to these 4 videos so you can watch them. All right, so have a good day, and we'll see you back for Chapter 5B.